At 1 o'clock GMT, I'm Regid Ahmed, and coming up in this edition of the Newsroom, a fatal attack in Paris as prosecutors open a terror investigation.
On a entendu boum boum, donc
we heard bang bang. I went outside and I saw a man spread out on the floor.
The US president says thank you to North Korea after it vows to dismantle its nuclear site. Iraq has voted and the wait is on for the results, but turnout isn't what it was hoped it would be.
The electoral process had a very low turnout. Most citizens didn't come out, and those who came to vote had errors on the voting paper.
And the winner is... Israel tops the Eurovision competition, but that's not where the drama ends, as Britain contends with a stage invasion. We'll bring you all the highlights from Eurovision 2018. That's all coming up on the Newsroom.
Hello, I'm Rosemary Crick with the BBC News. French prosecutors have opened a terrorism investigation after a man armed with a knife lashed out at passers-by in central Paris. One person was killed and 4 injured, 2 of them seriously. President Emmanuel Macron said that once again France had paid in blood but wouldn't yield an inch to the enemies of freedom. Gavin Lee reports.
One of France's busiest tourist spots, the Paris Opera District, is cordoned off tonight as police investigate another suspected terrorist attack on French soil. Witnesses say they heard the suspect shouting Allahu Akbar and tried to enter several bars and restaurants, but was blocked from getting in by those hiding inside. Several eyewitnesses say police officers first tried to taser the suspect and then fired 2 shots to kill him. The French Interior Minister Gérard Collomb has described the attack as a despicable act. President Macron thanked the officers for their actions in stopping the suspect.
A luxury apartment block with links to the former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak is reported to have been raided by police in the capital Kuala Lumpur. An unnamed senior police officer told the Reuters news agency that officers were looking for sensitive documents the new government feared could be taken out of the country. President Trump has thanked North Korea after it announced it would begin dismantling its nuclear test site in less than 2 weeks. In a tweet, he described Pyongyang's decision as a very smart and gracious gesture. From Seoul, here's Laura Bicker.
Kim Jong-un has carried out all 6 nuclear blasts within the secluded mountain valleys of Punggye, but now he says he'll blow up all the tunnels and block all entrances and allow foreign media to watch. It's the kind of serious step the US has been hoping for. Earlier this week, the Secretary of State travelled to Pyongyang. He had an offer to help build the state's economy if they give up their weapons. Skeptics say President Trump is falling for the Pyongyang playbook, that we've seen these kind of gestures before. But others believe there's a chance that North Korea's priorities are changing.
Iraq's Electoral Commission says fewer than half the country's voters took part in Saturday's parliamentary elections, the first since the government declared victory over the Islamic State group. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi's political group is thought to be marginally ahead. Martin Patience is in Baghdad.
People here hope this election will represent a fresh start. But Iraq's next leader will face the mammoth task of rebuilding the country's shattered cities after 4 years of fighting the Islamic State group. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi won praise for his fight against the Islamist militants, but he's facing unexpectedly tough competition from other Shia politicians. Many Iraqis are deeply disillusioned by widespread government corruption and a weak economy.
World News from the BBC. Israel says it will almost double the number of troops on its border with the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank to deal with any Palestinian protests about the opening of the US Embassy in Jerusalem on Monday. The embassy's move from Tel Aviv coincides with the culmination of weeks of demonstrations against the creation of the Jewish state. Officials in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo say they have identified the remains of 10-year-old twins in the rubble of a high-rise building which collapsed after it caught fire over 10 days ago. The officials say the boys, Wenda and Welder, had been squatting in the building with their mother, along with around 50 families. City officials say the remains of 2 other victims have been identified. One of Britain's most notorious serial killers has died in prison at the age of 72. Dennis Nilsen admitted murdering 15 young men at 2 houses he lived in over a 5-year period in London. His crimes were only detected by chance when a drain outside one of his houses became blocked by human remains. Simon Clemerson has more details.
It took some time for the full horror of Dennis Nielsen's crimes to become clear, but he eventually admitted to killing at least 15 people. Several of his victims were homeless, young, gay men who he lured to his flat in Muswell Hill in North London and strangled. Despite admitting killing 15, he was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder and was jailed for life in 1983 with a recommendation he serve a minimum of 25 years. Later, it was decided that he and other serial killers would never be released.
And Israel has won the Eurovision Song Contest with a song inspired by the anti-harassment campaign Me Too. The victory by the 25-year-old singer Netta is Israel's 4th in the annual competition. Netta won with an unconventional singing style that has been likened to a clucking chicken. Cyprus came second and Austria third. BBC News.
You're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Regid Ahmed. Once again, France is dealing with the aftermath of an attack on the streets of Paris. This time, a man armed with a knife went after people in the Opera District, killing 1 person and injuring 4. Witnesses described what happened.
On a entendu boum boum. Donc,
We heard bang bang. I went outside and I saw a man spread out on the floor.
French prosecutors have now opened a terrorism investigation. That's as the Islamic State group announced on its news agency that it was behind the attack. Here's the Paris prosecutor, François Molins.
À ce stade et sur la foi d'une part de témoignages.
At this stage, and going off the testimony that the attacker shouted Allah Akbar while attacking passers-by with a knife, considering the modus operandi, we have seized Paris Public Prosecutors Anti-Terrorist Section.
Saisie donc la section antiterroriste du parquet de Paris.
Well, just before coming on air, I spoke to journalist David Chazan in Paris, who gave me this update.
This attack took place right in the heart of Paris, near the Palais Garnier Opera House, in the second arrondissement of the French capital. This is an area with lots of cafes, restaurants, cinemas and theatres, and it was packed with people out for the evening when the attack happened shortly after 9 p.m.
And can you tell us more about what the prosecutor had to say about this particular attack?
The prosecutor said that it is suspected to have been a jihadist attack. He quoted witnesses as saying, several credible witnesses as he described them, saying that the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar, and police are describing the man as aged about 20, bearded, with long dark hair. So we don't know for a fact that this was a jihadist attack, but that is the suspicion. And so this case has been handed over to specialised anti-terrorist prosecutors.
Can you tell us more about what the witnesses have had to say?
One witness, a woman called Fiona Zanetti, said that she was in a restaurant when the attack happened, and she described how the assailant just seemed to be targeting people at random, rushing up to them and trying to stab them where they were standing or walking. And there were scenes of chaos as people started running. Now, several hours after the incident, a lot of people were still being kept inside the restaurants and the cafes where they were when the attack happened.
Now, France is understandably on high alert given the history of attacks in that country, and we've heard from the French president and others about this particular incident.
Yes, that's right. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has tweeted saying that he saluted the courage of the police who neutralised the attacker in the name of all French people. He said his thoughts were with the victims of the attack, those injured, and their families. And he also said that France is paying the price of blood once again, but is not yielding an inch to the enemies of freedom.
David Chazan there. Votes are being counted in Iraq's first general elections since the government declared victory over the Islamic State group. Fewer than half of Iraq's electorate exercised their right to vote in Saturday's parliamentary elections, and according to the country's electoral commission, the turnout was just over 44.5%. Samad Ismail is the manager of a polling station in Baghdad.
The The electoral process had a very low turnout. Most citizens didn't come out, and those who came to vote had errors on the voting paper or with the prints, or their name existed at another station, and there wasn't a serious effort to educate citizens by the Electoral Commission.
Well, the BBC's Yelda Hakim is in Baghdad and told us security was a major issue for the authorities.
Security has been tight across the country. Airports and borders have been closed, and the movement of vehicles from one province to the other has been limited. Here in Baghdad, there's been a curfew since last night. However flawed this country may be, this is now one of the few democracies in the region, and its future and its stability is incredibly important for the rest of the region, especially as there are increased concerns that Iran and the United States could be on the path to war. Both of these countries have been incredibly important for Iraq, its stability, and also for its politics. So whoever becomes the next leader of this country will have to play the very difficult balancing act of trying to maintain good relations with both the United States and Iran. For Iraqis, this is now a turning point.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. Still to come on the newsroom, as Sweden pushes ahead with plans to get rid of cash transactions. Not everyone is happy.
My name is Maj-Lis Jonsson, and I'm 73 years old. You have that feeling that the society is not for you.
But first, Rosemary has the headlines.
A terrorism investigation has been launched in France after a man in Paris stabbed and killed one person and injured 4 others. Reports from Malaysia say an apartment block with links to the defeated Prime Minister Najib Razak has been raided by police. And President Trump has thanked North Korea after it confirmed it would dismantle its nuclear test site within 2 weeks.
In a tweet, Mr. Trump described the North Koreans' announcement as very smart and gracious gesture. Earlier, Pyongyang had said foreign journalists would be invited to watch the event. According to the state news agency, the nuclear complex in a remote mountain location in the north of the country will be shut later this month. That's 3 weeks before President Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet in Singapore. From the South Korean capital Seoul, our correspondent Laura Bicker.
Another key public announcement from the usually secretive state. She's describing a ceremony to dismantle North Korea's main nuclear test site. Kim Jong-un has carried out all 6 nuclear blasts within the secluded mountain valleys of Punggye, but now he says he'll blow up all the tunnels and block all entrances and allow foreign media to watch. It's the kind of serious step the US has been hoping for. Earlier this week, the Secretary of State travelled to Pyongyang. He had an offer to help build the state's economy if they gave up their weapons. Back in Washington, in a meeting with the South Korean Foreign Minister, Mr. Pompeo made it clear sanctions will remain until any deal is done.
It will require a robust verification program, and one that that we will undertake with partners around the world.
It's been a week of dizzying diplomatic efforts, with the release of 3 men who were held in North Korea for over a year. Skeptics say President Trump is falling for the Pyongyang playbook. But others believe there's a chance that North Korea's priorities are changing, and that just perhaps this time might be different.
Laura Bicker. Now, for fans, it's the highlight of the year, and Eurovision did not disappoint. 2018 brought a €65,000 dress, chicken impressions, and Britain interrupted by a scary stage invasion. We'll get more in a moment, but first let's listen back to some of the highlights, beginning with the winner, Israel, with their Me Too-inspired entry. Well, the BBC's Paul Henley was watching every moment of the night. I asked him whether Israel's victory was a surprise or a typical Eurovision choice.
Well, it was one of the favourites, and no, actually, it's not typically Eurovision. In fact, I think the winner this year takes Eurovision to a new, some would say, better place. It's been described as Eurovision's Me Too moment, in fact. Netta from Israel is a woman who was bullied at school, who says she's standing for diversity, for difference. She's larger than any of the other contestants. She's proud, she's out there, she's a feminist. She says, I'm not a Barbie, I've got something to say. And the lyrics of the song say, I'm not your toy, you stupid boy. So although it's an entry that's poking fun at stereotypes and norms, I think it's a fine entry, it's an original entry. She was copying nobody. And it was very funny, actually, to see the 4 female hosts of the competition here in Portugal, who looked, by the way, every one of them, every inch a Barbie doll, hand over the crown to this anti-Barbie figure. It was quite a classic Eurovision moment, I would say, and I think a worthy winner that got votes from the public from all 4 corners of this continent, and also from the professional juries too. It was a clear runaway winner.
All right, it was an entertaining item as well. Well, there was an incident as well with the British entry that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, we're still a bit in the dark as to the motive of the stage intruder who ran on while Suri was performing for the UK, and this is what happened.
We can hold our hands together through the storm, through the storm.
How did Suri, the British entrant, handle it?
She was the consummate professional. She grabbed the microphone back. She, at one point, fist-pumped the air and carried on with extra vigour. She delivered a great version of the song, actually. It was a slightly lame song, and the UK was never going to do particularly well with it. The fact that the UK didn't come actually bottom of the results board is probably due to the fact that she showed such professionalism on stage. The UK had a disappointing year, another in a long row of disappointing years, but the results this year really disproved that idea that it's all a foregone conclusion, that neighbours vote for neighbours, and that it's clear who the winner's going to be from the start. Look at the songs that scored really well with the public and the jury alike. Austria and Germany were up there in the top 5 because they had quality songs, well written, well performed. There were no automatic votes for Russia this year, who got thrown out in the semi-finals, didn't even feature in the grand final tonight. I think what the results this year proved, that Eurovision is out there and open to anyone with talent and ability and with a fine song, and I think it will actually ensure the survival of the competition for some years to come, tonight's result.
Paul Henley in Lisbon with the best gig of the night, I'd say. Now, you might have heard of the concept of the Napoleon complex, or short man syndrome. It's a widely held belief that short men can be more aggressive to make up for their height. But is there actually any evidence to support the theory? At 1 metre and 69 centimetres tall, Napoleon Bonaparte was average for his time and taller than the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi or the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Now, the Newsroom's Shivani Dave spoke to the researcher who is trying to get to the root of this widely held myth.
I am the king. I will punish you.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
That was Joffrey Lannister, the Game of Thrones king, known for his threats and asserting his authority. But is this down to his, and I quote, short man syndrome? The theory, otherwise known as the Napoleon complex, suggests men act more aggressively to compensate for their lack of height. For over a century, psychologists have been debating this phenomenon. But a team from the Netherlands has put together a test to work out if the cliché is true. Researchers asked men to stand head-to-head, tall versus short, in a dictator game. One man would decide how much money each of them got. Then they compared the result with a similar scenario, but in this situation, one man would make an offer and the other could choose to accept or reject the money. Lead researcher on the study, Jill Knapen, told us what happened.
What we found was that short men tended to keep more money, but only when they were in a position of full power. So only if the taller men could not reject their offer, and then they would both end up with nothing. The taller men did not do that. And we think that is because short men have to have a more flexible strategy in order to gather those resources, because they don't have the same opportunities as the taller men do. So when they do have the opportunities, then they can switch their strategies in order to get more of the resources out of the competition. If you look at the big picture, then you see that these men actually use height cues in their social environment, at least unconsciously. They then use this information to actually change their behaviors or change their strategies.
But not everyone's quite so convinced. Mike Essler at the University of Central Lancashire said the findings don't support the idea of short man syndrome, because to truly express the Napoleon complex, they're supposed to be publicly advertising their aggressiveness rather than in private. As a short person myself, I'm pretty glad the science is still out.
And now Rosemary has some other stories from our news desk.
The army in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it is working with park rangers to try to locate the 2 British tourists who were kidnapped by unknown gunmen on Friday. During the attack in Virunga National Park, which is home to rare mountain gorillas, a female ranger was shot dead. A driver was taken away with the British tourists but was later released. The President of Madagascar has approved a new election law lifting a clause which would have prevented the main opposition leader from running for office later this year. It follows a decision last week by the High Court, which ruled that the law barring former President Marc Mravman from standing for election was unconstitutional. Will Ross reports.
President Eri Radzau-Nahiman-Pian was forced to back down following the court decision. Under the new law, his rival, the former President Marc Ravalomanana, can now run in this year's election. Recently introduced legislation had barred him from standing because of a criminal conviction he received while in exile after being ousted in a 2009 coup. Opposition supporters were out on the streets recently as they felt the president was trying to fix the election by blocking his main rival. They're only calling this a small victory, though, because they'd wanted the president to resign.
Football fans clashed with police outside the Olympic Stadium in Athens before the Greek Cup final. Around 5,000 officers were deployed to separate rival supporters of Super League champions AEK Athens and runners-up PAOK Thessalonica. A Spanish referee was in charge of the cup final to avoid any suspicion of match fixing. In the match, PAOK Thessalonica beat AEK Athens 2-0 to win the cup.
Thanks, Rosemary. Now, is Sweden doing the right thing by embracing a cashless economy? In recent years, the technophile country's been leading the race towards becoming the first completely cash-free nation. This is thanks to a boom in mobile and online payments, as well as a rapid rise in the number of shops and local bank branches refusing to handle cash. Maddie Savage has been meeting Swedes with different views on the subject.
My name is Maj-Lis Jonsson, and I'm 73 years old.
Her local bank branch no longer handles cash or cheques, and it charges for over-the-counter transfers. So it's just cost her 75 krona, around $9, to pay back a friend who booked a train trip.
The banks, they are so rich. Of course, they always say you can do it for free at internet, but it's a problem. We are some that don't know how to do it. Now I'm going for a cup of coffee. I think I need it and I'm worth it after this.
In general, Swedes are actually among the most tech-savvy retirees in Europe. 70% of 65 to 74-year-olds bank online, compared to an EU average of 26%. But the Swedish National Pensioners Organisation says that means people like Maj-Lis can end up feeling even more excluded.
If you want to pay with cash on a bus, it's not possible. You need a smartphone to enter a public toilet.
That's Ola Nilsson, a spokesperson for the group.
My name is Victor Schuberg and I'm an advisor at SEB, one of the biggest banks in Sweden.
How many of your branches still handle cash?
That's going to be 7 out of our 118 branches. The reason for that is customer demand, really.
Welcome to Stockholm School of Economics.
My name's Claire Ingram-Bogush. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I would say most Swedes have adapted to the cashless society without even thinking about it. New apps are something that they just build into their everyday life. Swedes are very trusting, but I think that is changing. The recent Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, has made people more aware of how their data is being used.
How long do you think it will be until Sweden becomes completely cashless?
Not long. Less than 5 years and we'd be overwhelmingly cashless.
Maj-Lis Jönsson is sipping on a milky coffee at a busy cafe, which, you've guessed it, no longer takes cash.
You have that feeling that the society is not for you.
My name is Johan. I'm a part-time student and part-time worker. Me personally, I love it. I think that cash are out of date, not really necessary.
My name's Agatha. I don't see that it's good if we're going to be entirely cashless, because I think there should always be an option to use cash in case of scenarios where the internet doesn't work.
Nationwide polls suggest that even though most Swedes prefer using cards and mobile payments, around 7 in 10 still want notes and coins to stick around in future. The Nordic nation may have developed a reputation as one of the most innovative places on the planet, but it seems locals are also clinging on to a more traditional Swedish trait: caution.
A British man has broken the world land speed record for the fastest garden shed. Yes, you heard me. It's a souped-up motorised garden shed driven by its owner, Kevin Nix, who smashed his own record on a beach in Wales. The Newsroom's Richard Hamilton spoke to him ahead of his attempt.
53-year-old Kevin Nix from Oxfordshire in southern England is the proud owner of the only legal motorised shed in the world. He set out to smash the previous fastest speed for a shed of 129 kilometres an hour at Pendine Sands in Carmarthenshire. Over the last 3 years, Kevin has spent more than $18,000 building his bespoke shed on wheels, which now has an engine that's more powerful than most sports cars. I caught up with him before his drive.
I created the world's fastest shed out of a car that I was going to scrap. It's too good to scrap, so I built it. I've run it for 3 years, got several speed records, Guinness World Record. But I blew the engine up, and I've now got a 450 horsepower twin-turbo engine in it. And it is incredibly fast. It's rather good fun.
Do you feel completely safe inside it?
I own an S-Class Mercedes, and this is more comfortable to drive than my S-Class Mercedes.
What sort of speed are you hoping to do today?
Well, last year I did 80 miles an hour, so any improvement, it's all about beating personal best.
No, I quite like that. What's that in the background now?
That's some little old motorbike that's just going up there. It's the standing mile they're doing here today.
So you're not competing against other vehicles, you're just trying to break your own record?
Yes, there are some of them with the bikes, they race in particular classes. I'm kind of in a class of my own, really.
Pendine Sands has become synonymous with land speed attempts since the British racing driver Sir Malcolm Campbell broke the record in his car Bluebird in the 1920s. Kevin's garden shed was also joined by a selection of motorbikes, go-karts, three-wheelers, and even a contraption in which the biker sits inside a single wheel. Germany's Zef Eisenberg was also trying to break the land speed record on sand for a motorbike. 2 years ago, he spent 3 months in hospital with 11 broken bones after a crash that nearly killed him. And you may be pleased to know that Kevin Nix did manage to break the record for his garden shed, clocking an official time of 101 miles per hour, or 162 kilometres an hour.
Well done, Kevin, and his speeding garden shed. You've been listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Regid Ahmed. Now, just before we go, we do want to bring you some news coming in. We're getting reports of a bomb explosion at a church in Indonesia's second largest city, Surabaya, in eastern Java. Police say there are no known casualties at present, but we will bring you more details as they come in on the BBC World Service. But also, if you do want to keep across that story and all of our main stories, just go to our website, bbc.com/news.